But I want to open the floor to questions. Got one hand here, a second there. Go to the microphone or get the traveling mic, identify yourself, and fire away. Yeah, the mic's not on.
I would like to add two political considerations that, in my view, were instrumental for arriving finally at the creation of the euro. The first one is the political friendship of two political leaders at the time, Helmut Schmidt and Giscard d'Estaing. They were determined, firmly determined, to move ahead. And since they had been finance ministers before, they were aware of the inertia of orthodox conservative administrations and the central banks. So what they dictated was a revolution from above, and I hope that in the future we have something similar. The second political element has to do with German unification. It's no secret that France was not too enthusiastic about it, nor was Britain. But since it could not be prohibited, they insisted very strongly that the European Union did away with the Deutschmark and created something new. And that also drove the development towards that. Now, Germany at the time was not too happy to have the euro, because the only national symbol of pride that West Germany had was the Deutschmark. And to give that up was something, also since the East Germans wanted the Deutschmark. So the East Germans went to a quick transition period from their money, which was worth nothing, to Deutschmark, to the euro. Now, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to end on a reflective mode with respect to caution about uniform proposals and suggestions. And I have in mind the IMF, but also I encourage institutes like yours that do valuable work to be mindful of strong history and traditions that sometimes stand in the way of uniform solutions. Take the traumatic memory in Germany of the hyperinflation of 1923, which was even reflected in the summit discussions in London. We had Zimbabwean portions, and there were 15 billion marks were equaled $1 at the time. That is still very vivid, and that is the reason why we are a bit hesitant to come forward with more packages. So my advice is differentiate and take into consideration the traditions and history, sometimes very negative ones. Thank you.
Okay, message is taken. Next question.
Oops, sorry. Miranda Zaffa, IMF Board. My question relates to Jean Pisani-Ferry's comment on the importance of having the right instruments to address crisis. Specifically, he mentioned that only the non-euro area countries can access the EU BOP facility, and that the opposite applies in terms of provision of liquidity by the ECB. This liquidity is generously provided to euro area members, but non-members can only do repo operations. They cannot do swaps. My question is, what is the reason that these gaps exist? I want to speculate, and you can confirm or deny. The reason why euro area members don't have access to a BOP facility is because having such access would be prima facie evidence that the excessive deficit procedure does not work. And the lack of liquidity provision through swaps to Hungary and Poland and all the Eastern European countries, I think probably derives from some Germanic idea that you need to have collateral in order to extend liquidity. So a repo provides the collateral, which is the bond, but the swap has no collateral, and that's probably why the ECB does not do it. Thank you.
Marco, you want to answer that?
No, I think it's
John?
Should we go now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me respond to that question. I think you're, in a way that relates also to the previous question about the origins of our system. I mean, there was, at the time of creation of the euro, there was a very strict, very strong view on the German side, and I think a very right one, that you don't blur the distinction between going into the euro and remaining with your currency, because there was a temptation to say let's have a common currency, but let's keep our autonomy, and so the Germans were very strict, saying either you're in or you're out. Either we make the transition, and the day we make the transition is a completely different policy system, and that was right. That was absolutely right, because there was even kind of crazy ideas about the fact that you could have the best of two worlds. So I think historically it has played an enormously important role. Now, does anyone believe now that we still with those illusions? I don't think so. I think the learning has been made. So now we can afford to go back to a number of issues and say, well, now that we've learned, do we need this and that provision strictly to reinforce this message? If you take the reason why there is no possibility of giving assistance to a country within the euro area, it was clearly to reinforce the view that there was no co-responsibility on public debt, which I think is a fundamental tenet of monetary union, rightly so. Each country is responsible of its own public debt. Now, the fact that you lend to a country doesn't mean you may take responsibility for its debt. And the very proof of that is that when the IMF lends to a country, it doesn't take responsibility for its public debt. It provides temporary assistance that has to be repaid by the country. So we could have that now in the euro area without creating a confusion between the national responsibility and the responsibility of the EU. And I would say the same applies to the swap agreements. We have also to recognize now that we have created the euro at the core, and that at the periphery a number of development have taken place as a consequence of the success of the euro. So I think on the margin we can be more flexible than we could afford to be 10 or 15 years ago.
Question in the back.
Randy Henning here at the Institute and at American University. My question is for Marco. Marco, you talked a little bit about the European Union's contributions to programs in Central and Eastern Europe. And it is true, of course, that the EU, partly through the Commission, has been deeply involved in the shaping of those programs in Latvia, Hungary, and Romania, and has negotiated these along with the fund, and that the EU has contributed financing along with the IMF. There have been some differences over the conditionality that should be applied in these packages, but the important thing was that those differences were overcome in negotiations among the parties with the borrower. We hope that cooperation isn't tested by failure of these programs over the next couple of months, or too strongly tested by disagreements over a common approach to Central and Eastern Europe. But I wanted to ask you, Marco, what lessons you draw from your work with the IMF together in negotiations with countries like Latvia, what lessons you draw for how to structure the relationship between regional financial arrangements and the International Monetary Fund more generally.
Yeah, go ahead.
The IMF has undergone a generic mutation in the past 6 months. From an institution very much sidelined and having lost its soul, is now, in demand. You see that the London summit. We asked the IMF to do many things. To provide early warnings together with the Financial Stability Forum, now become board, to strengthen the surveillance, to provide also indications and blueprints for financial stability reform, and of course being ready to help countries in trouble. And not only that, but leaders have also put the money where their mouth was. So increasing substantially the resources, and actually, I must say there, Europe has done its part with 75 billion euro committed for this bilateral support in the first phase now. And now, I mean, the IMF is found back his soul. He has also found back his purpose, and it is very good for everybody. I mean, what I have found is that openness of the IMF to cooperate has increased substantially. I think there are here some in the room. I may look at Vito Tansy here, who has the historical memory of the IMF for forever. I mean, he was very much. I mean, openness was not openness to cooperate was not really the main features of the fund in the past. Actually, quite jealous of the prerogatives. I think now we have established, I mean, very, very close cooperation in sharing the financial burden. I mean, for all the countries you have mentioned, others that may come, they will jointly support the financial rescue for these countries. And also we have defined together the conditionality. Certainly, as you alluded to, in certain cases one had to discuss. We came with somewhat different views at the beginning, but all these countries we have converged on the same views on conditionality, and we have a monitoring system which is working. I mean, relatively smoothly. Of course, there is a lot to learn on our side, the Commission side. I think Jean was right in saying that our, let's say, culture of surveillance is different than what we are implementing now for these countries. I mean, we have a softer type of surveillance, more, let's say, rule-based, and here instead it's much more the typical conditionality that you have in implementing fund programs. So there is a lot to learn on our side. I think we have increased the resources and in quality and quantity. At the same time, I think the IMF is also benefiting from cooperation with the European Commission, because I mean, precisely to go beyond what a speaker said before, namely applying one size fits all or the typical standard conditionality. I think this is important. So there is a mutual benefits. I see this cooperation as evolving even more in the future from a case-by-case approach in the case of countries in troubles to a more structured approach in which we share the diagnosis. We cooperate in a let's say in a much more organized ex-ante way, acknowledging that we have different comparative advantages. I mean, we cannot rival at the European Commission. I mean, the expertise of the IMF on financial issues of application of stress testing banking when we compute the financing gaps. At the same time, I think we can acknowledge also that we have our own comparative advantages. For instance, on knowledge of public finances, budgetary policy in these countries, we are much more on the spot than the IMF. So I think there is a good complementarity, and I think that both institutions benefit from that, and there is areas of cooperation which we can further develop in the future.
Adam, you want to add to that?
Well, this just seems like an opportune moment to respond briefly to both this issue and some of what Marco said earlier about the response of the Union, the European Union to the Eastern European crisis. While acknowledging the facts of the impressive sounding list that Marco put out, I have to respectfully disagree. I mean, talking about admitting Cyprus and Malta to the monetary union is sort of like when Japan bragged about its agriculture-free free trade agreement with Singapore. Let's not be too cute about this. You have a bunch of countries that are of noticeable size and human population that are being still told, and I think Jean put it very well, not so much we don't need softer rules. We need more sensible rules. That on the current inflation rules of how the ERM is supposed to work should be targeting deflation as their goal. We also, while talking about it, the first speaker, Mr. Fisher, spoke about differentiating between countries, and as Marco points out, there are countries that are standing up and waving their hands, and Poland is standing up and saying, I'm not Hungary. And I was subjected to a lecture from someone when I was in Berlin last month, from the Romanian foreign ministry, from the Bulgarian foreign ministry, telling me why they're not Romania. That's nice. And from a market point of view, if your goal is to try to enforce actually one standard of judgment and of membership, then that kind of what economists would call a separating equilibrium is a desirable outcome. But presumably, the European Union's goal for member countries is not to create a separating equilibrium and a constant set of me first, him behind, and that person never within the membership. There is supposed to be some principle of European solidarity that extends beyond the structural adjustment funds being slightly sped up. Moreover, and this is the one place where Marco and I, or receive wisdom at the Commission and receive wisdom at least in this institute, and I think at Bruegel, are very different, which is Marco made the sophisticated claim that in response to Jean's point about these rules being set up to preempt crises and not respond to crises, that, well, in general equilibrium, it works out, which, if I understand him correctly, and I think I do, is a way of saying, well, if we deter people along the way from making bad decisions, in the end, the functionality will be better. This is empirically questionable. When you have a Hungary and a number of other countries in Eastern Europe who voluntarily and were somewhat by laissez-faire encouraged to de facto Euroize and borrow a lot, if not in euros, in Swiss francs and other foreign currencies, without being allowed out, an exit out, you are de facto encouraging them down a very bad path. And that strikes me as short-sighted. And in a 10-year period, if you're going to set back growth in some of these countries 3 years, even if, say, taking the Hungarian case, they are the poster child for needing an adjustment program, that hardly seems like a good general equilibrium record. Moreover, if we think about the functionality and the stability of the European Union and the Euro area, these are not imperiled by bad developments in Eastern Europe, but they are certainly not helped. And a world in which Poland sits there and cockily says, well, we are just like Mexico. Well, okay. Mexico's not having too much fun at the moment either. You've got a situation where the interest rate benefits of being the more relatively virtuous of the emerging market countries may well be swamped by the fact that your immediate next-door neighbor suffered a 30% currency devaluation and has a lot of unemployed people who can take away jobs from you. Finally, there is one more point, though, that has to be made. Mr. Fisher said something, and I was joking with Marco, that Marco's predecessor, Klaus Regling, would have killed him for saying that. And with my friend Ambassador Sharoff here, I feel the need to set the record straight. The idea that EMU was in some sense a bargain for German unification is not supported by the historical record. EMU was undertaken not as some way to cage Germany. EMU was undertaken as a spirited, right-thinking aspiration of the European nation-states. It is in this regard that I find it slightly unfortunate that Marco raises the idea of, oh, look, the U.S. screwed up, so why are you complaining? Well, this isn't about comparisons to the U.S., with the notable exception of the empirical matter of bond markets. John and I were pretty scrupulous about not making any comparisons to the U.S. in this context. The reason it matters is just as the euro was an idea beyond anything anybody had seen before, a transnational currency imposed not from the outside but through willful acts of sovereign democratic governments. Similarly, the fact that there isn't a better crisis management mechanism either in this country or elsewhere at the moment is not a reason to dismiss Jean's recommendations for a better crisis management mechanism. Thank you.
Okay, Vito, your name was taken in vain. You'll get what I think will be the last question, because then I'll come back to the panelists for a final remark each.
I just want to make a couple. By the way, I'm Vito Tansy, former IMF and former Italian government. By the way, I was the president of the Euro committee in 2001 when the lira was changing to euro. Just a couple comments. Some of this observation that has been made me think, well, replace Hungary with California and ask yourself what is the fragmentation of the bond market, and ask yourself whether California today can borrow the same way as, I don't know which is the best state now in the US. I mean, you can easily overdo this kind of fragmentation. I'm not sure exactly what it means. Does it mean that Hungary should keep borrowing from the central bank as much as it wants? Hungary had a problem before the crisis, so that also this distinction between a technical and political institution to help countries. Having spent 27 years at IMF, 20 of these years as the director of the fiscal affairs, I'm very sensitive to this. Technical decision, for example, is independence of the central bank. When we all applauded the independence of the central bank, now the central bank in the US has become an off-budget budget, no? And essentially, that's what is happening. Now, that's a political change from a technical to a political thing. Do we really want to move completely away from technical institution to political institution?
Okay, let me come back to the panel. Jean, you have been the least vocal of the panelists, so let me start with you. Then if Adam has anything else, and...
Let me go last, because I'll just say something logistical.
All right. So Jean, Marco, and Adam for the final word.
Okay, let me start with the questions or the remarks by Vito Tansy. On the bond market, I'm not suggesting that we should somehow blur the distinction, and I said, each country remains responsible of its own debt. That being said, the fact that there is no government bond market of a similar size and depth than the US bond market is a limitation compared to what was expected or what could be expected from financial integration in the EU. We have a corporate bond market that works well. We don't have a government bond market because we don't have a federal institution that issues bonds. So I think the question is, and that's very much a question I said, there is no blueprint on the table. The question is there a way in which there could be creation of a market for government bond that would reap some of the benefits of integration without leading to confusion between the debt of country X and the debt of country Y.
Yes, we do.
Yes. There is a market for states, yeah.
In Europe, everybody can buy an Italian bond, so I don't know what exactly means.
Everybody can buy an Italian bond when you're an investor somewhere in the world and you want to buy, plain vanilla European government bonds and have the depth that corresponds to that. What you buy, in fact, are German bonds, because that's the substitute. That's the best approximation there is to it. Not only because of the credibility, but also because of the depth of the market. So in fact, we have a benefit that is limited compared to what financial integration could bring. And there is a reason for that, and we know very well the reason, that we don't have a federal institution that issues bonds. We're not going to create a federal institution or federal budget just for the benefits of issuing bonds. The same way we're not going to create a federal institution just for the benefit of doing macro coordination. We know that a federal budget emerges from other things, from the fact that you delegate some policy responsibilities at the public finance level to an institution of this sort. So that's the reality. But there is no. This should not prevent us from thinking about whether there are sensible ways to do the job. On your point on political and technical institutions, I was not implying that we have to move away from technical institutions. What I was saying is that when you want to exercise conditionality, you better be an institution that has in its mandate to exercise conditional lending and to be able to be as tough as necessary, as unpopular as necessary. This is not the case of the EU. The EU, on a permanent basis, has to be supported voted for by the citizens. The EU has a permanent legitimacy problem. So if you engage in this kind of conditional lending, you will be facing the fact that people can be very angry about the EU. And that's not something I think is sustainable. The IMF can be unpopular for 2 decades, or extremely unpopular in some countries, but it survives. I mean, it's not essential because it doesn't have to be voted by people. There are no referendums on treaty changes. There are no election to IMF Parliament and all that we have in the EU. So there are limitations to what we can do if we have to be very tough. And that's why I'm saying it's a dangerous game to say we're going to have a purely internal solution and we're excluding the call to the IMF, which actually has been done by several European policymakers, including Commissioner Almunia, who said, I don't exclude, let me quote also Joachim Almunia, I don't exclude a crisis within the euro area. What I exclude is an IMF intervention within the euro area. And I think that's questionable for the reason I gave. Now let me end on just one remark. I mean, we may look as criticizing too much, being too much on the side of the glass half empty compared to the glass half full. The reason for that is that in times of crisis, people learn about the performance of an institution. They learn things that they will remember for decades. So in a crisis, you don't want just to perform average. You want to perform excellently because you know that you will not be given the opportunity to correct whatever failures that have been revealed during a crisis. People will just get interested about what actually this institution is performing, is doing, and they will learn, and then they will remember. So the test is essential internally and externally.
Marco?
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points. On comparison with the US, I think I was stating the simple fact that while acknowledging that we have to improve our governance system, our financial architecture, our decision making, and we are trying to do that. They will come forward with proposals very soon. This improvement here, or the failure or the weaknesses of the current system, do not necessarily translate into better policies or better choices. That was the simple observation that I made here on this side of the Atlantic. Let's say, in principle, you do not have any of the failures that you have pointed out. Yet the policy mistakes were made, and this is let's say, is a simple observation. So I do not deny that one has to improve and seize up the opportunity presented by the crisis. Actually, in the past, Europe has had, let's say, polar behaviors in crisis times. Sometimes it reacted by a subdued way and ended up in eurosclerosis. Other times seized the opportunity. The creation of the euro was one of them, to leap forward and to make very courageous decisions. I would hope that this crisis here is the opportunity for the second type of behavior. On euroization and foreign currency exposure, currency mismatch in several Eastern European countries, I think that is indeed a fact. It is a problem. I think it is an issue which is we hope to be able to correct for the future. I mean, what we are going to come up with in the month of May as a follow-up of the report de la Rosière is the proposal to create a European Systemic Risk Council, which would give recommendation, which would give early warning, precisely to address potential problems of that sort. So this is a problem that we had in the past. We did not have that this supervisory authority. and we'll have it, I'm sure, in the future, and we'll be able to, let's say, correct these problems before they arise. So it's a failure of supervision that we'll have to correct. Another point on Eurobond markets. Yes, I think this is a good idea, and there is a debate ongoing there. It is a difficult one. One has to acknowledge it's a political difficult one because of moral hazard problems and the resistance on the part of a number of countries with the very good AAA to seemingly having to take care of the debt of profligate countries. Nevertheless, I think the debate has taken has come up to the fore again. There is some small steps in terms of common issuance, in terms of, let's say, coordination of debt issuance between member states, and we are helping these efforts at the Commission side in a more technical way. And I would predict that this debate here is not going to go away, and hopefully the crisis is an opportunity to make important steps in this direction. The final point on Adam's several comments, just one point which is factually incorrect. We are not recommending, we have never recommended, we do not recommend now, we are not going to recommend in the future targeting deflation in the implementation of the Maastricht criteria, in particular on the inflation side. In the past, negative inflation or inflation very close to zero has been eliminated in the calculation, and we have implemented the price convergence criterion in a sensible way. We continue to do it in the future. We'll definitely not recommend countries to target deflation in order to qualify for euro area membership.
Okay, real quick. First, Marco, thank you for correcting me on that. That's good news. I hope that's in writing somewhere, so when it's people not with your wisdom succeed you, that will continue to be the case. Second, 2 quick points to Vito Tansy. First, the issue of the Federal Reserve being politicized or independent is not one with the fact that they're expanding their balance sheet now. The question is, in 2 years from now, when it's time for them to tighten, do they reverse or are they too slow? And that's when we'll find out. The fact that they reacted well to a crisis doesn't indicate a lack of independence. Third, second point to Vito Tansy, the IMF has largely in recent years, and I think, in my opinion, correctly, changed its stance on a number of the fiscal policy issues that were advocated in the past, including some things like the expansionary consolidation chimera, and I think that's helpful. Final point, and then one logistical point. Rabbi Hillel, the great sage, once said, if I am not for me, who is for me? If I am only for me, what am I? And if not now, when? If the euro is not advocating for itself in international areas, no one's going to do it for them. If the euro area is only for the euro area and not sufficiently for its near neighbors and fellow members, then it's really not living up to what it needs to be. And where we started this conversation, which goes to Jean's response to Marco about why we talk about this, if in the time of the U.S. government's policy's greatest financial screw-up in 70 years, the euro is not asserting itself as a global currency, when will it ever do so? And those are the questions I'd leave you with. The logistical point, I would just say, is Fred Bergston today is celebrating his birthday. And so besides the fact...
More than 10.
Besides the fact that it is indeed the 10th anniversary of the euro, today specifically is the, 43rd anniversary of Fred's birth. And he gave up basketball to be with us today, which is what he normally does on his birthday. So I'd like to ask you all to wish Fred a happy birthday.
Thank you very much.